Okay, let's start this session. I'll just point out that this side of the room is a whole lot better behaved than that side of the room. I don't know what's going on in the room, but we can all learn a lot from the exemplary decorum down in this half of the room. This session, its title is Free at Last, and that is not a reference to the fact that this is our last session of the day. You have been high quality attention for a long day of listening and attending to a parade of 6 presentations, and this has the sort of feel, this one, of a culminating session because we finally get to hear from Aaron Dworkin, who's brought us all together here anyway. So, the title of this session is Free at Last, the innovative workplace environment that nurtures the Sphinx team and empowers inclusion. Before I introduce Aaron, let me introduce the 3 remarkable responders that we have. If we can bring out Robert Lynch, President and CEO of Americans for the Arts, Daniel Roumain Bernard, violinist, composer, and serious innovator, and Susan Feder, Program Officer, Arts and Cultural Heritage at Mellon Foundation. Come on out. And let me just mention, I know in both Robert's and Susan's remarks, they're going to actually be introducing a number of kind of rhetorical questions. If any of them are of particular interest to you, grab them and use them for the discussion part. If you hear a question from Robert or Susan that seems like that's a really juicy question, I want to go there, grab it and throw it right back onto the stage when we get to the question part. And let me introduce our host hero, Aaron Dworkin. As you probably know, a 2005 MacArthur Fellow, former member of the Obama National Arts Policy Committee, President Obama's first appointment to the National Council on the Arts. Aaron is the founder and president of the Sphinx organization, the leading national arts organization that transforms lives through the power and diversity and the arts. An author, social entrepreneur, artist, citizen, and avid youth education advocate, he continually receives extensive national recognition for his leadership and service to communities. His visibility has made an enormous difference for all sectors of our field and includes being named one of Newsweek's 15 American people who make America great. He's the recipient of the Royal Philharmonic Society's honorary membership, Harvard University's Teaching Award, and many, many other awards. Our dear friend and host, Aaron Dworkin.
Hello, everybody. So somehow I have to talk to someone. I got the late Saturday afternoon slot. So so I am going to try to energize this session. And in many ways, innovation is something new that we wanted to really bring to the conference this year. And specifically, as we started thinking about that, I wanted to talk about the literal operational environment that we have at Sphinx. And the reason, so this is going to be a little bit kind of unique for us, where we're usually talking specifically, here are programmatic issues, here are policy issues. And this is really an organizational operational issue. And the reason why we wanted to talk about this and why I wanted to share it is because we are absolutely confident that if we did not have this type of operational environment, Sphinx could not do the work that it does in the space of diversity and inclusion. So I'm looking forward to not only sharing these issues, but then also hearing some of your questions and comments, because some of the things we do are a bit atypical. So first I want to mention issues of diversity and inclusion are complex. They are risk-laden, and as you've heard from all of the sessions, they are ever-changing. And as a result, the work that we do requires productivity, it requires innovation, and a huge aspect at Sphinx is that it requires efficiency. We are highly efficient in terms of the work that we do, and these things never happen by accident, certainly not over time. And so an organization has to be intentional about this type of work. One of my favorite quotes from Joe Gerston who's a kind of leadership consultant in diversity and inclusion for a lot of Fortune 500s. If you don't actively, intentionally include, you will unintentionally exclude. And so we take intentionality very, very importantly with our work that we do at Sphinx. And it is core not only to the programmatic work and how we look at artistic excellence, but it is the case in our operational environment. So, one of the things I wanted to just, and I'll go through these pretty quickly because we have limited time, is I wanted to just share our mission. And a lot of organizations, and we could spend a whole day talking about mission versus vision, but at Sphinx, vision and mission are exactly the same thing. Sphinx transforms lives through the power of diversity in the arts. It is what we do, and it is also what we aspire to do. And we could talk kind of a little bit more about that. However, what underlies everything that we do, the way we interact with each other and with those outside of the organization, is through our core values. These permeate everything that we do, and they permeate through our reviews. We do quarterly performance reviews, and they permeate those as well. And those are that we have integrity to standards of excellence. This cuts across everything that we do. It must be excellent. And whether it is working with a young person and their education or their artistic development, or whether it is the development of our brochures for SphinxCon, passion goes without saying. You've got to be passionate for the work that you're doing. Honest and trusting relationships, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when I talk about our fierce environment. Commitment to mutually supportive relationships. Again, this and respect are both internal and external for Sphinx. Ability to adapt. This is one of the key aspects of Sphinx. We do very few things the same if you take a look over a couple-year period. And for those of you who were able to be at the very first SphinxCon, you will notice a drastic difference between that and this. And that's because we asked all of you, what about the experience? What about the engagement level? And we heard that, and so we had the ability to adapt. We never think we know for sure what is best to do, because that is often changing when you're working in the environment of diversity and inclusion. And last, of course, a spirit of innovation. We are trying to solve complex problems. So if we are not creating an innovative work environment, then how on earth are we going to come up with the solutions to tackle these very difficult areas? So there are 3 specific things that I'm going to share with you today, and the first one of them is fierce. So for those of you who kind of don't know, this really hinges on the fact that at Sphinx, we have honest conversations. That means that we don't sugarcoat stuff when we are talking on staff. And if we disagree directly with one another. And this is an actual human resource process that you can, develop at your own organizations. And as part of this, we actually have protocols and models for various conversations that we have on staff. We have templates that we follow in those conversations. And one of those, for example, is confrontation conversations. If there is some issue that is existing on staff, and I'm sure all of you have had this experience where you're working with someone and there is just this tension. There was a disagreement at a meeting, they did something that annoyed someone else, but you don't really talk about it, and then there's that tension, and then it ends up having some type of point where it hits a tipping point, and usually something negative occurs for the organization. That does not occur at Sphinx, because if there's ever the slightest issue, someone calls a meeting and they have a confrontation conversation. We have a specific template that we go through where a person describes to the other person what those issues are. And this can be peer-to-peer, or it can be supervisor to a direct report. Another thing that we do is we have beach ball meeting models. So I'll talk a little bit more about how many meetings we have, but when we have a meeting, we never have a meeting at Sphinx without following a specific model. So this model lays out exactly how the meeting is constructed, why the meeting is occurring, what it is occurring for, who is going to be involved, and what is going to be discussed, and the framing of that conversation. And again, this goes back to efficiency. We don't waste time. So as a lot of people who have been experienced with Sphinx's internal working, Sphinx is not the kind of place where there are conversations around the water cooler. Now, it's interesting, we can talk about this a little more, and there may be some pushback, but there are some innovation companies where the idea of creating a space around a water cooler is good for innovative ideas to flow. We just try to do that in a way that is efficient so that we don't have wasted time that doesn't relate to our goals. Susan Scott is the founder of Fierce. She has an amazing TED Talk. I encourage you guys to check it out if you haven't had a chance. She wrote multiple books on this that we use on staff and all of our team members read. And one of her great quotes that I love is that she says, while no single conversation is guaranteed to change the trajectory of your life, any conversation can. And one of the things that results from that is how do you approach every single conversation you have? Do you do it with intentionality? And do you do it with a care and an interest, knowing that that particular conversation, potentially one of the ones you're having here at the conference, may literally change the trajectory of your life? So that's Fierce. And the second thing I wanted to share with you is Row, which is a results-only work environment. This was developed by Culture RX, which is a spin-off from Best Buy. So this was initially implemented at Best Buy. There are some other major corporations, including tech corporations like Yahoo and others that have utilized Row over the years, and even some government agencies. And so this is a results-only work environment. So what does this encompass? So we have a focus on SMART goals. And what I'll mention too is before we engaged with and became a formal Row environment, we were a pretty flexible work environment, and people had a fair amount of kind of flexibility in terms of what they were doing in the workspace. But when it came to our reviews, we would have annual performance reviews. And to be frank, they were pretty, kind of, how are things going? Are there any glaring problems? And it was kind of a conversation that we would have, and usually they went pretty well. We went from that to very detailed quarterly performance reviews. And with those performance reviews, their sole focus is on our goals. And so when we adopted a Row, we developed very, very specific SMART goals, which means they are specific, they are measurable, they are achievable, they are realistic, and they are time-bound. And every single position at Sphinx has very specific SMART goals laid out for it. There are no support positions at Sphinx. There is no support staff whatsoever. I don't have an assistant. Every single position at Sphinx has a portfolio which they are responsible for, and that portfolio is associated with a set of SMART goals. And with those performance reviews, I should add that they got a lot, and I don't want to say harsher, but there certainly is kind of that sense about them. And what I mean by that is that we developed specific accountability. So we have a very specific measuring system, and if a goal is not met, then there is a problem on staff. And so we fix that problem very, very quickly. And if we're ever in a very, very rare circumstance where we are into, say, the second quarterly performance review, where a goal that has been laid out has not been met, then there are significant discussions that begin to take place about the work that's being done and whether it is in fact the right match. So when we look at our goals and we lay them out, accountability is a huge part of that. On the flip side of that, supervisors do not just lay out goals for their direct reports. It is a mutual process. And before we set our goals for the year, which we just recently did, there is mutual agreement and 100% ownership of one's goals by every single person on staff. So, along with that very specific measurable goals and operational environment that we have, we introduce complete flexibility. There are no set working hours or days at Sphinx. People come into the office when they want. They leave the office when they want. And as a side note, we have a very specific protocol about discussions in the office. People cannot inquire as to why people are leaving or not leaving, because we don't want anyone to have a sense of guilt about the schedule that they have developed for themselves. The purpose is we want people to create the work life that works best for them. For some people, that's being in the office 7 days a week. They can't get work done at home, those types of things. For other people, it may be sitting on a beach. If someone is meeting their goals, Sphinx doesn't care whether you're on a beach in Tahiti or you're in the office. If the goals get done, that's all that matters for our mission. That's all that matters for the students we're trying to reach and we're trying to impact. Another thing, no mandatory meetings. And I should add that you may be looking at some of these things and somebody go, well, yeah, this is maybe, you know, so on and so forth. I have to stress, this is how we operate. In other words, I'm not exaggerating. So when I say there's no mandatory meetings, that means I cannot call a meeting and require people to attend. We have two very rare exceptions where that takes place. And the main thing is if there is ever an addition to our permanent Sphinx staff or someone is leaving our permanent Sphinx staff. And those are pretty much the exceptions to when I call a meeting and I require that everyone attend. Separate from that, me or any supervisor does not set a mandatory meeting. Instead, they create a calendar item and they use our fierce protocols about what a meeting is, which includes what the meeting is about, who they would like to invite to the meeting, and what the goal of the meeting is. And if you think that's a meeting you should attend, you go. And if you don't think you should attend, and it's not useful to your goals, and of course everybody's goals includes supporting other people on staff, then you shouldn't go. So no mandatory meetings. And also unlimited paid vacation. Again, this kind of people are like, well, what does that actually mean? It means that people don't take vacation at Sphinx. We have what's called going dark, which basically means you are not available to other team members. And people go dark whenever they want, however often they want, based on their own personal work, personal life balance. Always looking at their goals, because that's all that matters. And when someone goes dark, of course, because they know they're accountable for their goals, if any of their goals require certain things when they may be dark, they address that. It's on their responsibility to figure out how to be able to make sure that their goals are met. And so that is, as I mentioned, going dark. And the third area that I was going to mention, so again, we have fierce, we have row. These are these kind of underpinning human resource policy systems. And every single year, Sphinx retreats with formal consultants, and we review these processes, and we also elevate just the way in which they are intertwined with our work environment. And the third is our Idea Lab. And all of these were initiated several years ago. So in our Idea Labs, and this is just a few kind of just innovation pictures, is that, again, we never think, and I certainly do not think, that I have the ideas that will solve the complex issues related to diversity and inclusion that we have to solve. We have to be always evolving. And that is not only programmatically, but it's also in terms of our development and fundraising efforts, and it's of course related to our operational environment. So every single team member at Sphinx is empowered with their own personal budget to do whatever on earth they would like to do that is innovative for the Sphinx team. And so every year we have all of these new ideas that we test. And some of them become permanent policies that we have at Sphinx. And it could be something that relates to trying out something that we otherwise wouldn't be able to do in a normal programmatic budget that adds to a particular program. It could be something in development where there's a resource system that we haven't availed ourselves of, prospect research or something along those lines, and someone wants to test something out that we otherwise really wouldn't do or wouldn't think that it's a proper kind of use of our typical budget. And so this is our experimentation station. So we are in a constant state of experimenting and testing new ideas. And I would say that probably over the past several years, the majority of those don't necessarily become permanent aspects of our work, but a minority of them do. And the ones that do are transformative for us. So, in terms of looking at these underlying kind of operational environment that we have, fierce, which is how we communicate and interrelate with each other and those with whom we work, our row environment, which is literally how we operate and work on a daily basis, and Idea Lab, this constant fueling of ideas. We believe that so far it has been working, in that there is a deep respect and affection between all of the team members at Sphinx. One of the ways that this, I think, is seen is that we did receive the Alfred P. Sloan Award for Workplace Effectiveness and Flexibility, which is primarily based on workplace surveys that they do of detail with employees and with their supervisors. We have half of the industry average in terms of our turnover rate. The average is about 35% in our industry. We have a 15% turnover rate. We have more than double the industry average in terms of tenure. In our field, it's about 3 years. The average tenure at Sphinx is 7 years. And our administrative costs are substantially below the industry average, and that is because we operate very efficiently. People do not do work or spend time at Sphinx or on Sphinx's time that is not related to their goals. We believe that this leaves us with a level of excellence that we can bring to bear with our work that we do in inclusion through a diverse board, our staff, our faculty, and our audiences. And in the end, most important, we want to be happy. I was going to try and actually play the song, which I thought would be really great, but couldn't get it to go at the last minute. But we believe in having fun. So Sphinx is a place where if we're not having fun, there's something wrong. We work in the arts. If we're not having fun, society is doomed. And so we take that seriously, and we try to be happy. And I know from speaking for myself, I get up every day and I get to do what I love, and I get to work with people who I admire, I respect, and who I have a lot of fun working with. So I wanted to be able to share kind of some of these internal workings, if you will, at Sphinx, and I look forward to conversing about it. Thanks. Well done.
All right. Lean and mean, fierce, happy innovation. 3 respondents about that internal view. Let's first hear from Bob.
Great. So first of all, I would like to come and work for you. I think that sounds pretty great. Congratulations, though. It does really sound great. And I now have to go assess whether I am happy or not. I think I'm happy, but I'm not sure I'm that happy. I want to say, first of all, that it's interesting for me to be on this panel because I don't think of myself as an expert on this subject. Management, I've had to manage, but personnel management, not my favorite thing. And so there are a lot of things that you have talked about that I find interesting and possibly applicable and useful. But I have also a lot of questions, and my presentation might just be a series of questions, rhetorical questions, but others may want to pick up on that as well. My style in general, I think, and I've got 6 staff here so they can tell me whether this is true or not, but I'm very comfortable with encouragement, and I do a lot of encouraging. I'm not a great lover of conflict, who is? But I probably go overboard on the encouragement and far less on the conflict resolution because there's too much to do. And I'm a manager who doesn't manage, but I'm focused on doing stuff myself. I come from an older-fashioned approach of vision, mission, goals, objectives, strategies, tasks, but I think we're pretty flexible on that because in terms of my own style, I was trained as a poet, and you have to be comfortable with ambiguity in order to be a poet or to like poetry. So we take that structure and we're kind of flexible about it. And it sounds like that's where you were, kind of, and then you went to this more, in some ways flexible, and in some ways very structured approach. The other end of that is we do some work with a wonderful guy, Robert Wong from Google. He invented Google Glasses, and his approach to all of this is simply his mission, purpose, goals, objectives, strategies, is simply do epic shit, is what he says. And that's the mandate he gives to his designers when they go forward. So what I want to say is there is the ends that you talk about are actually wonderful ends, and the ends that I would welcome, diversity, inclusion, productivity, innovation, efficiency. What you describe, I can see how that would work really well when you have a committed staff or a committed board. I wonder how it works when you have less committed or skilled people. Does it then require some kind of a strategy shift? More hands-on help, more meetings. And when you have one of those meetings where you're questioning somebody and you call that meeting, is that a mandatory meeting or do they not have to come? At some point there is that. This is a big investment in self-empowerment, it looks like, and I'm all for that. Let people move forward. Does it always work? Some people are maybe better at being self-empowered and on their own. And when you have those conversations, honest conversations, are both sides equally honest? Do you find that sometimes one side is more honest and the other side is more defensive or caged, and what do you do about that? It's a curious thing for me. We go drinking. So, that's another strategy. That's a really good management strategy.
It is.
How do you enthuse?
We're going to adopt that.
How do you enthuse differently motivated people to have the same integrity for standards? I think really recruiting well might be an answer to that, but different people have different passion for mission or for different things. And they also have I think, my experience, we have 75 staff, different approach to being mutually supportive, which was another thing. In a climate of pure innovation, do people get lost? Do some people get lost and want, a roadmap or actually want more structure? Is a question I would have. And how do you know when somebody is really not the right fit with all of the freedom that you have, and then you have to make a change, or do you? Or do you simply keep going and invest in those people? And a question I would have is, does one size fit all here? Does it work for, I think you told me 10 on-site and 50 volunteers. As you get bigger, how does this work? Couple of other things. Does mandatory meetings or no mandatory meetings create a duplication of effort because you have to keep repeating information to a number of different people that could have been covered in one thing? I'm just curious about that. No set days or hours. I like that one. Does everyone respect everyone's productivity? I mean, do they really feel everybody's equally product? I was raised on Catholic guilt, so the absence of guilt, it confuses me. Unlimited paid vacations, that's pretty amazing. Interestingly, most Americans don't take the full vacations that they do, so maybe this can actually work. Maybe that's what you're discovering. How is excellent performance rewarded? Raises for some and not others? How do you deal with those kinds of things? So if you have great answers for all of these things, there is a consulting contract waiting for you at Americans for the Arts. And Bob Lynch going dark right now.
Susan.
I've spent my entire career in traditional workplace environments, so I think I'm singularly unqualified to be sitting here, but thank you anyway, and thank you for this inspiring talk. That said, I thought I would give an example of a case study in progress and then pose a challenging question as well to Aaron. We at the Mellon Foundation about 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, funded playwrights in residence at 14 theaters around the United States. This wasn't specifically a diversity initiative, but I'm very proud that 9 of the 14 are artists of color, and they're at theaters from as small as 10,000 Things in Minneapolis to the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. We had very few requirements. We were offering salary and benefits at the level of senior staff positions at each organization. So the salaries were different depending on the playwright and the location. The proposals were evaluated based on statements that were created by the artistic director of the organization and the playwright, so jointly prepared so we could judge authenticity The theater had to commit to a production, which was not as easy as one might think to have a playwright in residence. But beyond that, it was not just salary and salary. It wasn't a fellowship. It was embedding the artist in the institution. So we felt we were disrupting the workplace environment by putting an artist in place. And we've been monitoring this for 2 years. Hal Round at Emerson College is documenting for us. We hired part-time what we call producing fellows to monitor this, to take the burden off of the theater. And there is some documentation on Hal Round, and there will be more at the end of the project. By and large, we're thrilled with what it means to embed an artist in an institution and not having to find that work. We're finding there are as many different ideas about that as there are playwrights and residencies. Some are hoping to become future artistic directors and are trailing the artistic director, providing dramaturgy. A lot of them are doing literary management. Some have taken on roles as liaisons to the boards. Some are making playwrights that come into the institutions feel more comfortable. Others are mentoring young playwrights and actors in the community. Some have university affiliations and are bringing that to bear. By and large, we feel that this is mutually enriching for both the playwright and the institution. But of course, there are lessons that we want to learn and unintended consequences of what we set out to do. And I think the first one I would say is that even as secure as providing a playwright with 3 years of salary and benefits, this is not a permanent position. So along with the security, they're looking over their shoulders about what happens after 3 years. And it makes it very difficult for them to be thoroughly embedded in an institution because it's very hard to say no to an opportunity that comes along during that time, whether it's a commission for another play, whether it's a TV writing show, whether it's another directing opportunity. The second is that playwriting itself is not a 9-to-5 occupation, and it's not necessarily done effectively in an office environment. So the playwrights needed the flexibility, as Aaron has described, of not necessarily being in an office, setting their own hours. And then there is the effect on the rest of the staff. Pushback that we didn't anticipate at all was staff that said, Ken, turn that off. Who said, why are they getting paid without a job? What's their job? They're just writing plays. And the lack of necessarily respect for that artistic creative role in the organization was something that I wouldn't say it happened across the board, but it was a surprise for us to hear. And I think it made us realize that while we had used the artistic director and playwright relationship and looking for that authentic relationship, this really affects the whole environment of an institution. And in a different iteration, I think we would have wanted to involve more of the staff in understanding what this was about and making it happen. So stay tuned. We're, as I say, in the 3rd year. We intend to renew this program with some of the same members and with possibly different members of the cohort. But turning to my question, Aaron, because most of us work in the performing arts or for performing arts organizations, how does a row environment work, or can it work in any way in a time-based, place-based environment of a theater, opera company, dance company, music organization where you have to be at the rehearsal, you cannot skip out, performances take place at a certain time? Can the row and fierce values be incorporated in an organization without these other aspects of flexibility? So that's my question.
And hold that answer. Okay. Daniel.
Yes. Well, I'm so I'm ever impressed with you, Aaron, and the things that you do, and the thought and the consideration that you put into what has, I think, always been your life's work. I remember being at the University of Michigan with you in those practice rooms, windowless rooms, and you came into my practice room one day, which is an act of trust, right? This big afro. I think we both had big afros. And you said, I want to start this competition. I want it to be about people of color and certain musicians and Latino musicians, and it's going to be a violin competition. What do you think? And I said, I think it's a terrible idea. And I'm so glad I was so wrong. And I love that. And I remember your enthusiasm then and how you've managed to carry that enthusiasm and what I would say massage and exercise that imagination muscle. I know, I've had the opportunity as a composer to work with a lot of great artists who have big ideas. In fact, Bill T. Jones comes to mind. He talks about a world of ideas. He would also talk about, within the mundane, anything, any mundane task, there's a vast reservoir of imagination waiting to happen, waiting to be mined by you. This is Bill T. Jones talking, right? And he would say things to the dancers and to myself as a composer. Okay, you see this cup? I want everyone in this room to come move this cup in a different way across the table. And it would force you to really think about, how am I going to move this cup versus someone before me or after me? And some of the questions I was writing down as everyone was speaking, this notion of productivity, innovation, and efficiency. So I wonder, where does new music play a part in Sphinx? I'm really curious about how old traditions are old innovations waiting to be made new again. I'll say that again. I think that old traditions, or maybe take out the old, I think traditions are old innovations waiting to be made new again. Why Detroit? I think that's a big deal. Every time I fly here, it's a big deal, right? You could be anywhere, but you're here. Why? What is Aaron Dworkin's exit strategy for Sphinx? You've really built this thing. When or why or how do you let it go? Does Sphinx staff ever take a retreat? I think you said that they did. Or perform in what I would call an orchestra of life. So much of this is built on orchestral music, chamber music. I wonder what that means to you. In my own workshops, I do these things called an orchestra of life, right? What does that mean to you? How does the orchestra play a part in Sphinx? Because I think for a lot of people, myself included, I see you as the conductor, I see you as the music director. Can you be the second violin, last chair, right? Can you expound on what happens on the retreats? Could you work with someone you don't admire or love, but that person was in love with Sphinx and was making significant contributions to Sphinx? And I say this because one of the best things for me as an artist and administrator, certainly as an artist, there were times when you were on stage with people you did not love or admire, and you had to work with them in the service of something else. I wonder if that's already happened in Sphinx, and if it hasn't, or if it's coming, or if it does, what is your response? How do you manage that? How do you mitigate that? And I will leave with one final thing. I do think that imagination has so much to do with what Sphinx constantly is becoming. How do you exercise that imagination muscle? What are the things that you do? You look great, by the way. I know.
I'm trying to be like you.
No, man, hey, 40, man, man, 40, boom. Well, boom. No, but you look great, but I wonder on the inside, I'm imagining there are things that you do, and I'm imposing this term on you, to exercise, flex, and massage your imagination muscle. I'm really curious about that, where pure, raw imagination plays a part in the mundane of running something.
Whew. All right. Okay, Aaron, we have a little psychiatric couch. We'd like you to open up all the answers to these questions. These are big questions for you. What do you think?
Yeah, so obviously there's a whole host of questions. Let me try and just kind of raise two things. One that I think covers at least a thing that was raised in some ways by all three of you. But first, just to kind of say to you, Daniel, to respond about Sphinx. I went through, I think, what many musicians do when they kind of begin to do more administrating, a whole guilt thing of my music, I should be a violinist, why am I administrating, what does this mean? And I was actually still at Michigan when I was kind of going through these thoughts about Sphinx at the time. And I had a very clear moment one day when I came to the conclusion that Sphinx became my primary instrument. So I've never not seen Sphinx as some kind of administrative entity. I see it as a creative endeavor. It became my instrument. So I looked at it in the same way that requires practice, but is motivated and driven by creativity and by impact, by changing people's lives. Because that's what you want to do as a musician. You want to just reach out from stage and connect with someone, right? And leave them in some way different than when they came into your performance. And so I've always seen Sphinx that way as an entity. Which is why I'm always uncovered with the terminologies about arts administrator, because I definitely don't see myself as an arts administrator, a social entrepreneur, cultural entrepreneur, that kind of thing. And about our kind of operations in a row, one of the big things that is taught in a row and gets reinforced, and I would say, and we have some staff in the room who would probably, and a number of our board members are in the room, that I would say I don't think any row fully perfects this, but it's called sludge. And so we actually have deep protocols about this because it is natural for humans to go, oh, you know, Aaron hasn't been in the office in a few days. I wonder, like, what is he doing? What's, you know, or it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Aaron, where are you heading? And so there is both the thoughts that the person has, which might be judgmental, and or feeling like I'm sitting here working my butt off and this person isn't working. And that can create huge morale issues in a work environment. And it also prevents me from doing whatever it was I was going to do at 2 o'clock, even though I was up maybe till 3 o'clock in the morning working, just because I wanted to be able to go to the movies with my wife the next afternoon. Right? But now I will not do that because I'm going to feel guilty because I know someone's going to ask me and I'm going to be perceived as not working. So what that is called, those types of questions are called sludge. And so we joke about it sometimes, we say, don't sludge me, bro. But on a very serious tip, we do not permit sludge commentary in the Sphinx offices. And we take that very, very seriously. And if I ever see it, or supervisors ever see it, or anybody sees it, we work very, very hard to not just diminish it, but get rid of it as quickly as possible. And there is a series of ways that you're taught in a row how to do that. And so if someone says, hey, where are you heading? And be like, oh, did you need something? It's just as simple as that. No matter what the conversation is, we are trained at Sphinx to return the conversation to our work. So it is always about, oh, we weren't in on Monday. Oh, I'm sorry, did you need something? Was there something that was supposed to have gotten done? So it's not about what on earth you were doing, because that doesn't matter to Sphinx, but what absolutely matters to Sphinx is what everyone is doing towards Sphinx's mission, and that we talk about a lot.
Fantastic.
So, sludging.
I want to open it up to the audience. 2 comments first from that just strike me. I want to mention them. Years ago, I asked Howard Gardner, who is the founder of the multiple intelligences theory, I said to him, what does musical intelligence, one of the 8 kinds of human intelligence, what does it look like outside the language of music? And he had never been asked that question before, and he said, finally, after a long pause, he said, well, have you ever noticed how musicians organize the work that happens around them? And when you said Sphinx became your main instrument, I think we're seeing in this a really eloquent demonstration of what musical intelligence, with a whole lot of innovative passion, actually looks like as it can embody itself in a different way an organization runs. It's an interesting challenge for all of us to think about how our artistic knowing can be fully embodied. it connects to the second point I wanted to make, which is one of the real common knowledge ideas about people involved in the work of helping arts organizations innovate, of which I've been fairly involved in, is that with lots and lots of work, organizations large and small can really do great work around innovative projects. What's really hard is for them to take the learning from that innovative project and bring it back inside into the way the organization runs. They can keep running it out here and do fantastic things with a project, but the internalizing of that learning is extremely difficult. It's another whole major step to do that. And I don't know that I've ever seen a more eloquent demonstration of what taking the learning of innovative activity and embodying it in the functioning of the organization looks like than what we've seen in the last half hour. So beautiful, congratulations. And to the audience, we have just over 10 minutes here for another 47 questions for Aaron. We got one, we've got two. Let's go first here.
Janice Goldthorpe again. So you talked a lot about how this works with your employees. Is there a similar process or some sort of corollary process that you're using with people who might be volunteering with the organization? And how do you help them understand what some of these work processes might mean in terms of their support of the organization?
Yeah, so great question. It's not formalized with volunteers or with independent contractors. So the nature of those relationships are a little bit different, obviously, and especially with volunteers, it's even more kind of sensitive because here you have people who are basically donors. They are contributing their time, and so looking at those relationships is very unique, and so we focus on them a little differently, and with independent contractors it's different. But what the similarity for sure is that it is all about whatever the goals are we're trying to reach. So no matter whether it's full-time staff or part-time or volunteers, we have a specific goal in mind that is outlined in some full-time staff members' goals. And so it is potentially being implemented and or empowered through others. And so the only way to effectively do that is to share and to have mutual ownership of whatever those goals are with that volunteer or with that independent contractor. So the things like time off and things like that don't necessarily come into play, but the specificity of what our outcome is that we want to achieve, at Sphinx, those are always very specific. We are never vague about what it is we're trying to achieve.
Yes, over here.
Rachel De Guzman. My question is not facetious, critical, and I think that I'm just very intrigued about the why.
As in, why do we?
Why row, why fierce? I mean, a little bit more, back up a little bit about why you started this process and maybe connect it to the outcome, to the innovation.
Yeah. I think two reasons. First and foremost, because we can better affect our mission. We can better change, transform people's lives through the power of diversity in the arts if we have this type of approach. That's number one. And number two is we can have a whole lot more fun doing it. And I'm a huge believer in independence, people's independence. The way that I might work or want to work, the idea that I would necessarily think that that's the way you or someone else would want to work, I think is absurd. And there are people who are morning people, there are people who are night people, there are people who like to work with a bunch of people around and a lot of noise, there are people who need the door closed and total silence. And so I just kind of, I guess from a personal perspective almost, want to affect a working environment that maximizes each individual's freedom to work the way they want to work. Because in the end, that will provide the platform for them to provide the most amount of impact to Sphinx.
Question a little further back and then right in front, 1 and 2. Yep, that's you.
Hi, I'm Kendra from Americans for the Arts. I'm here to keep Bob in line. No, he did a great job, and everything he said is true. He's a great boss. But I had a question about the sludge and sort of not being open about what you're doing in your I guess, free time. Fast Company wrote a great article. There are 5 things that you can do outside of work that help improve you in terms of continuing learning. 3 of those things were arts things. But I think the things that we do outside of work help us grow in ways that we can bring back to the office. And if we're sort of pushing people outside of that life, or even if we have a large life event that's going to affect our work, you're leaving early because your mom is sick and you're helping to care for her. If you're pushing that out from people, you're not really opening yourself up to be a full person and engage always with what you're doing. So I'm wondering how you sort of balance that. Yeah.
Great question. Thank you, Kendra. I should clarify, I think, what I said. So first of all, a lot of Sphinx team members hang out socially a lot outside of work. So by no means is there kind of this wall between what people do in the office and separately. And I think almost everyone at Sphinx would say that they feel they're personal friends with everyone else on the team, as well as being colleagues. And so it is, sludge specifically is someone raising questions that relate to the reasons why someone wasn't in the office. So, but people all the time come in and say, you would not believe the play that I just saw. Or I was just down at the DIA and oh my God, or I was at DSO. So there's constantly conversations about what people are doing. But what we don't do is, why weren't you here? Which is a different conversation than, here's what I did. So people all the time talk about what they might be doing outside of work, but people don't inquire to other people where they were or why they weren't in the office in that way. So kind of examples, and we actually literally have these in our employee manuals for our row, but there are examples of sludge. So an example would be, why did you only get in at 11? Or why are you leaving at 2? As opposed to someone coming in and going, oh, you would not believe the movie I saw or the concert that I went to, et cetera. So it's definitely not that we don't share all of the experiences of our lives. We constantly do, and we talk about everything from entertainment and arts to wine and rum and sports and poker and various things. So we have a broad range of the personal interests, and I think if you were to talk to any one person on the Sphinx team, they would know a fair amount about actually the personal things that are important to their team members. It's just that we don't put a burden of inquiring as to people's work habits.
Yes, the question just in front. Yep.
And one of our Sphinx team members is at your table there, Kane.
Hi, I'm Kelly Reed from Community Music Works in Providence, Rhode Island. And I have 2 questions for you. The first is about communication with your staff. And since you have this very flexible schedule, which is wonderful, how do you ensure that all of your members know what's going on in the organization on a regular basis? So that's my first question. And the second is, do you apply this innovative model for your organization also to your business model? In other words, you're really thinking outside the box in terms of how you run your organization on a daily basis. Do you also think outside the box in terms of a business model and how you raise money for the organization and how you distribute funds, and maybe you dump a lot of money into marketing, whereas that's sometimes a no-no for nonprofits? And so I'm just curious about how you, and if you think creatively about other aspects of the organization.
Yeah. All great questions. We communicate very, very often, and we actually have a set of protocols. So what we set are expectations. So there are set time periods that when someone communicates to someone else on staff, there's an expectation they'll hear back. So typically that's usually 4 hours. So if someone will communicate out to someone, they'll expect some communication back within 4 hours. And what we focus on, and if you call and you can't reach someone at Sphinx, you will hear on their message that they're just wondering what it is that you need and when you need it by, and they will respond. Because what we focus on is someone's availability to others. And so we communicate highly through email, through video chat, through texting, so we're highly technological. And I would say this would not be possible without technology, so we focus very heavily on technology. Every single team member at Sphinx is issued a laptop as well as an iPad if they want to utilize one, and an iPhone. So everyone can do anything from anywhere that they would otherwise be able to do at their desk. So we empower everyone to be able to do their full work in the setting that is most conducive for them to have the biggest impact towards their goals. So we communicate, and when it comes to awareness, that again is someone's goals. So as Abigail, for example, is developing the conference and looking at all the various aspects, she is making the determination who on the Sphinx team needs to know what, and when do they need to know it, and how should I share that information with them. And that may be her calling a meeting 6 weeks out and saying, this is an update about SphinxCon, and what's going on, and so on and so forth. And so most likely, a development team member who has funding partners that are part of their goals and those funders are involved in some way in SphinxCon, is going to want to know and be informed about what's going on with SphinxCon, and would, because of their goals, attend that meeting. So everything is driven by the work and the goals. And what it means is each person on staff carries a huge responsibility as it relates to their goals. No one's going to kind of tell them what to do, like, hey, you should hold this meeting. And I'm sorry, the second.
It was about the business model.
Oh, yes. So with the business model, yes, we try to. We take some calculated risks when it comes to our programming side of things. We take very, very, very little risk when it comes to our fiscal management. We've never run a deficit in the 18 years of Sphinx, so we are very fiscally conservative. However, part of that conservative approach is innovative, in that we develop our budgets and we raise our funds for the year ahead. So in a typical Sphinx fiscal year, we would tend to have 80 to 85% of our following year's work and contributed dollars committed. So we run almost no fiscal risk with any program that we run. But that is also a form of innovation. And it requires some discipline, and it requires us to, unfortunately, not do some of the programming that we might otherwise want to do, because no matter what, we cannot have the organization under a financial risk. So no matter how much we want to do something programmatically, we can never do something that would put the bulk of our work at risk.
So we are out of time, which means I rudely stiffed the well-behaved half of the room for asking questions. There's bad lesson in that. But I wanted to give a chance for our three panelists, if you had any final thoughts you wanted to offer based on this kind of extraordinary case study that's been shared with us. Any of you?
My thought is simply that there's what you do, and then there's a lot of ideas within it that could be innovations in themselves in management models that I'm aware of, like our management model. So a lot to think about, and I appreciate it. I thank you.
Mm-hmm. I really appreciate the candor, and I think it's always wonderful to see how the soup is made, so to speak, from the chef. In the newsletter, I know that you spotlight many of the laureates, so on and so forth. I'm now you've got me wondering if almost a rhetorical question. I'm wanting to know if, and maybe the newsletter isn't the right place for it, but I'm very curious now about the staff, about them as individuals and their contributions to Sphinx. And I want to know more about these people, this team, this orchestra, your collaborators that you're working with. So I wonder about that. I'm very curious about them. I know them, kind of in passing here and at various, of course, at the concert. But I'm wondering if there's, how I can find out more about them, because your enthusiasm for them and the way that you're talking about this is it's very provocative, actually.
Susan, a thought? No?
Just wondering if there's any downside.
So two things, I think. One, that the reason why I think that Rose, maybe to some extent Fierce, but especially Rose, are not more common is because it is much more difficult to manage. It is far easier to control more and to be able to dictate more. And so in some ways we kind of are more of almost like an academic community setting. And Sphinx team members aren't tenured, but when you become a full-time Sphinx team member, there would need to be an ongoing unfolding process for a while to kind of, for Sphinx to make the decision that for some reason a transition would have to happen. So I think there's a sense of security, and to kind of also go to this, the team members at Sphinx are truly extraordinary people. And yeah. Truly extraordinary. And obviously as the president, I get to kind of I think be the receiver of kind of recognition of the work that they do often. But for all of you in institutions, that's not the case, and who's doing this work. And I would say that at Sphinx, potentially, not to in any way diminish other organizations, but I think at Sphinx in some ways even more so, because of the autonomy, because of the ownership and the breadth of what each person does on the team. What you see, what you've seen over the past couple of days here related to SphinxCon or tomorrow with Sphinx competition is their work, whole and in its entirety, developed, fostered, nurtured, and led by them. As it relates to SphinxCon, Abigail tells me what to do. When it comes to the curation of speakers or artists, Afa, tells us what to do and who to speak with and why the value of these types of things is important. And that just pervades everything at Sphinx. And I think the last thing that I would say is, as it relates to that kind of downside, is that I tirelessly work to make sure that it's an environment where people, anyone on the Sphinx team can tell me that I am utterly off the deep end. So we will often have meetings and I give an idea that I might be totally excited about, and they're like, yeah, no, Aaron, that's utterly wrong, and here's why. And there is never, ever, ever negative penalties for decrying what a supervisor, or certainly I, might think about things. Because if we had that kind of environment, Sphinx would suffer. The impact we're trying to have would be diminished. Because there is no way on earth that I know what's best. And that's why Sphinx has evolved the way I think it has. And so in that way, when you look at kind of exit things and so on and so forth, Sphinx is what it is because of the full-time and the part-time staff and all of the artists and alums that comprise the, as we say at Sphinx, La Familia.
Well, we all came together because we admire what Sphinx does in the world and the many things. We've come to even expand our sense of how Sphinx impacts the world. Thank you for opening up this other whole kind of virtuosity that lies behind all that impact in the world. So thank you, and thank you, colleagues.
Okay.
So we're done.